Devin Reynolds, successful black architect and single father, stands triumphant in his perfectly tailored suit as hundreds of passengers applaud. The flight attendant who discriminated against him now pale-faced, airline CEO personally apologizing. One phone call changed everything. But how did we get here? Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up against discrimination, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of people overcoming injustice. Now, let's rewind the clock and see how a routine flight turned into a defining moment that would change airline policy forever. Devin Reynolds adjusted his burgundy tie in the mirror, his reflection showing a man who had become an expert at balancing worlds. At 42, he had built an award-winning career as an architect, specializing in sustainable urban development, with his designs dotting skylines across America. But no achievement compared to his most important role, being father to 8-year-old Zoe. "Dad, did you pack my blue sweater? The one with the silver stars?" Zoe called from her bedroom, her voice carrying through their sun-drenched Atlanta home. "Already in your suitcase, along with your books and that dolphin you refused to travel without," Devin replied, smiling despite the weight on his shoulders. 3 years had passed since cancer took Jessica, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. The pain had transformed from an acute, stabbing grief to a dull ache that occasionally flared when Zoe tilted her head in that particular way that mirrored her mother. "We're going to have the best time in Seattle," Devin said as Zoe bounded into his bedroom, her curly hair bouncing with each step. "The client meeting is only for one day, and then we have the whole weekend to explore." The trip was a rare combination of necessity and opportunity. Riverfront Development Corporation wanted Devin's firm to design their new headquarters, a contract that could cement his company's reputation for eco-forward architecture. The meeting had been scheduled during Zoe's spring break, and rather than leave her with a sitter, Devin decided to turn it into an adventure. "Will we see whales?" Zoe asked, eyes wide with excitement. "I booked us on a whale-watching tour for Saturday," he confirmed, delighting in her squeal of joy. What Devin didn't tell his daughter was how he deliberated over booking first-class tickets. The extra expense wasn't insignificant, but after the year they'd had, Zoe adjusting to a new school, Devin navigating a challenging project in Phoenix that required weekly commuting, they deserved a treat. He remembered his own childhood, how his parents had scrimped and saved, how luxury remained an abstract concept rather than a tangible experience. His father, a postal worker, and his mother, an elementary school teacher, had emphasized education as the pathway to a different life. When Devin had been accepted to Cornell's architecture program on scholarship, it felt like validation of their sacrifices. Being one of only 4 black students in his graduating class had taught Devin lessons beyond structural engineering and design theory. He learned to navigate spaces not designed with him in mind, to excel quietly, to work twice as hard for the same recognition. His friendship with Theodore Washington began in those hallowed halls, roommates randomly assigned who became brothers by choice. While Devin pursued architecture, Theodore chose law, specifically civil rights law. "We're building different kinds of structures," Theodore often joked. "You're creating physical spaces that welcome everyone. I'm dismantling barriers that keep people out." Devin's phone chimed with a text from Theodore. "Kill it in Seattle. Court case wrapped early. Call if you need anything." The message brought a smile to Devin's face. Despite their busy lives, Theodore, now a prominent attorney with a national reputation, they remained constants in each other's lives. Theodore had been a rock after Jessica's death, helping with everything from funeral arrangements to explaining death to a 5-year-old who couldn't understand why mommy wasn't coming home. As Devin zipped his suitcase, his mind flashed to the promise he'd made to Jessica in those final days at the hospice. She'd gripped his hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Give her every opportunity, Dev. Don't let the world tell her she can't." He intended to honor that promise, despite the world's persistent attempts to place barriers in their path. Just last week, a new neighbor had assumed he was delivering packages rather than living in the upscale Inman Park neighborhood. The security guard at the high-end department store had followed them just a bit too closely as Zoe shopped for a new dress. The hostess at their favorite restaurant still occasionally tried to seat them near the kitchen despite their reservation. These were the realities Devin navigated daily while trying to shield Zoe from their harsh implications. He wanted her to grow up confident, not constantly looking over her shoulder or questioning her worth. "Dad, I packed my science journal too. I want to take notes about all the sea creatures we might see," Zoe announced, dragging her small purple suitcase into his room. "That's my girl," Devin said proudly. Zoe's passion for marine biology had blossomed over the past year, her bedroom walls covered with posters of ocean ecosystems rather than the unicorns and princesses that dominated her friends' rooms. The morning of their flight dawned clear and promising. They moved through their routine with practiced efficiency. Breakfast smoothies, last-minute checks of their travel documents, Zoe's special travel playlist humming from the speakers as they loaded the car. "First class is going to be amazing," Zoe chattered as Devin drove them to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. "Madison from school said her dad travels first class all the time, and they give you warm cookies and real glass cups." Devin chuckled. "Well, I don't know about the cookies, but it'll definitely be more comfortable than our usual seats." He didn't mention that this splurge represented more than comfort. It was a statement, a declaration that they belonged in those spaces as much as anyone else. That his success, hard-won through talent and perseverance, entitled them to certain luxuries. As they pulled into the airport parking structure, Devin felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Public spaces always carried a certain tension, the need to be hyper-aware, to ensure his behavior was beyond reproach. But looking at Zoe's excited face in the rearview mirror, he pushed those thoughts aside. Today was about making memories, not navigating microaggressions. "Seattle, here we come," he said, helping Zoe with her backpack. "Ready for an adventure?" Her enthusiastic nod warmed his heart. For her, he would face whatever the day might bring. The Atlanta airport buzzed with pre-summer travel energy, families heading to early vacations, business travelers in crisp suits moving with purpose, airport staff directing the controlled chaos. Devin guided Zoe toward the premium check-in area, her small hand firmly in his. The first-class check-in line stood nearly empty compared to the snaking economy queues. As they approached, the attendant's gaze flickered between them, a moment of confusion crossing her face before she composed her expression. "Good morning," Devin said pleasantly, sliding their passports and confirmation across the counter. "Reynolds, Devin and Zoe for the 9:15 to Seattle." The attendant, Brenda, according to her nameplate, tapped at her keyboard. "Are you both flying first class today?" she asked. Emphasis subtle but present on the both. "Yes," Devin replied evenly. "That's what I booked." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a beat too long before she continued processing their check-in. Beside him, Zoe bounced on her toes, oblivious to the undercurrent. "Dad, can we get breakfast after this? I want one of those cinnamon rolls we can smell." "Absolutely," he promised, grateful for her distraction. After receiving their boarding passes, they headed toward security, where the real tension began. Despite the dedicated TSA pre-check lane for premium passengers, they were directed to the standard line. "Sir, this lane is for pre-check passengers," the agent stated flatly when Devin attempted to enter. "We have pre-check," Devin responded, pointing to the designation on their boarding passes. The agent examined their documents with exaggerated thoroughness. "ID, please." Devin provided their passports again. The agent looked between the documents and them multiple times. "This is your daughter?" he asked, despite the matching surnames and the clear resemblance between father and daughter. "Yes," Devin said, keeping his voice level. "As you can see from our passports." After another long moment, they were allowed through, only to be selected for random additional screening, while the white family behind them proceeded without delay. "Daddy, why do we have to do extra steps?" Zoe whispered as they waited for an agent to become available. "Sometimes the system picks people randomly for extra checks," Devin explained, the well-practiced lie bitter on his tongue. It helps keep everyone safe. As a TSA agent waved a metal-detecting wand around his body, Devin maintained a neutral expression while internally reciting the mantra that had carried him through countless similar situations. This is not about you personally. This is systemic. Maintain your dignity. Model strength for Zoe. He remembered taking Zoe to Caldwell's, an upscale restaurant, for her 7th birthday. Despite their reservation, they'd been seated near the bathroom while tables with a view remained empty. When Devin had politely questioned this, the manager suggested perhaps they'd be more comfortable at the family-friendly chain restaurant down the street. Zoe had cried all the way home, somehow understanding they'd been deemed unworthy despite her young age. That night, Devin had made a promise to himself. He would never again allow Zoe to witness his humiliation. He would navigate these situations with grace but firmness, showing her how to stand tall in a world that sometimes tried to diminish them. "All clear," the TSA agent finally announced, returning their belongings. As they gathered their items, an elderly white couple smiled at them from the adjacent lane. "What a smart young lady," the woman commented, having overheard Zoe chatting about marine biology. "Are you going to be a scientist when you grow up, sweetheart?" "A marine biologist," Zoe corrected with the confidence of someone who had recently learned an impressive new term. "I want to study whale communication." "Well, you're certainly articulate enough for it," the man added, the compliment carrying that familiar backhanded quality that suggested surprise at her eloquence. Devin guided Zoe away with a polite nod, heading toward their gate. He checked his watch. Still plenty of time for that promised cinnamon roll before boarding. The Cinnabon kiosk provided a pleasant interlude, Zoe happily devouring her treat while Devin sipped coffee and reviewed his presentation notes for the Seattle meeting. These ordinary moments were precious to him, islands of normalcy in the sea of vigilance that accompanied their public outings. "Flight 1482 to Seattle now boarding first class and priority passengers," the announcement crackled over the speakers. They gathered their belongings and approached the gate, boarding passes and IDs ready. A small line had formed for first class, mostly men in business attire and a few older couples. Devin and Zoe took their place in line, Zoe clutching her plush dolphin, Captain Finn, that had been her constant companion since Jessica's diagnosis. The gate agent, a blonde woman whose name tag read Veronica Winters, scanned the boarding pass of the businessman ahead of them with a warm smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Whitfield." When Devin stepped forward with Zoe, Veronica's smile tightened. "Boarding passes and ID, please." Devin provided them, having anticipated the request. Veronica studied their documents longer than she had for previous passengers, her gaze flicking between the passports and their faces repeatedly. "Are you both in first class?" she asked, echoing the check-in agent's earlier question. "Yes," Devin confirmed calmly. "Seats 3A and 3B. Veronica frowned slightly. "One moment, please." She turned to confer with her colleague, a young man named Connor, according to his badge, who had been scanning economy passengers' documents at the adjacent podium. Devin felt Zoe's hand tighten in his, sensing her growing discomfort. Behind them, other passengers shifted impatiently. "Is there a problem?" Devin asked, his voice measured but firm. "Just confirming something," Veronica replied without making eye contact, continuing her whispered conversation with Connor. Connor glanced their way, shrugged, and returned to his station. Veronica turned back to them with a tight smile. "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is for first-class boarding." Devin's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Yes, as indicated on our boarding passes, which you're holding." More passengers had gathered behind them now, the line growing as the delay continued. Devin noticed a few glances exchanged, a couple of eye rolls. Whether directed at him or the situation, he couldn't tell. "Perhaps you were upgraded," Veronica suggested, her tone implying this was the only plausible explanation for their presence in the premium line. "No, I purchased these tickets directly," Devin replied, maintaining his composure while feeling Zoe press closer to his side. "May we board now? My daughter and I would like to get settled." After another moment of hesitation, Veronica reluctantly scanned their boarding passes. "Proceed to the aircraft," she said, her customer service voice lacking the warmth it had held for previous passengers. As they walked down the jetway, Zoe looked up at her father. "Why did she ask so many questions, Dad?" Devin squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Sometimes people aren't used to seeing everyone enjoy nice things. But don't worry, we're going to have a great flight." His words projected more confidence than he felt. The familiar knot of tension had formed in his stomach, the one that signaled trouble ahead. But for Zoe's sake, he would face whatever came next with the same poise and determination that had carried him through Cornell's hallowed halls and into boardrooms where he was often the only black face present. They stepped onto the aircraft. Captain Finn the Dolphin clutched protectively in Zoe's arms as they prepared to navigate this next phase of their journey. As Devin and Zoe approached the entrance of the aircraft, Veronica had somehow managed to board before them and now stood at the door alongside another flight attendant. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she spotted them. "Welcome aboard," the male flight attendant said warmly. "First class is to your left." Before they could take more than 2 steps, Veronica moved forward. "May I see your boarding passes again?" she asked, despite having checked them thoroughly at the gate just moments before. Devin calmly retrieved the passes from his jacket pocket. "Here you are." She examined them with exaggerated care, while passengers backed up in the jetway behind them. "3A and 3B, she muttered, looking at them suspiciously. "Yes, window and middle," Devin confirmed patiently, feeling Zoe's grip on his hand tighten. Meanwhile, Connor, the other gate agent, who had now boarded the plane to assist with the process, was greeting a white family with a quick glance at their boarding passes before directing them left toward first class. "Is there a reason you need to verify our seats again?" Devin asked quietly. Veronica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just doing my job, sir. We need to ensure all passengers are in their correct seats." "Of course," Devin replied, noting that the businessman who had boarded ahead of them, now settled in his first-class seat, hadn't received such scrutiny. "You're in first class?" Veronica pressed, her tone making it sound like a question rather than a confirmation. "Yes, as indicated on the boarding passes you're holding," Devin replied, his voice remaining even despite the growing frustration he felt. Zoe looked up at him, confusion evident in her eyes. "Dad, did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart, everything's fine," he assured her, though the tension in the air suggested otherwise. Veronica finally handed back their boarding passes. "Proceed to your seats. We'll be offering pre-departure beverages shortly." As they moved into the first-class cabin, Devin noticed several passengers watching the interaction with varying expressions, some curious, others uncomfortable, many simply oblivious as they settled into their premium seats. They reached row 3, but discovered another obstacle. Despite booking adjacent seats, the system had somehow separated them. Seat 3A was as expected, but 3B was occupied by an older white gentleman. "Excuse me," Devin said politely to the man. "I believe there may be a mix-up. My daughter and I are supposed to be seated together." The man looked up from his newspaper. "Seat 3B. That's what my boarding pass says." Devin nodded. "I understand. Let me check with the flight attendant." He caught the attention of Sophia Chen, the other flight attendant working first class. "Excuse me, my daughter and I seem to have been separated despite booking adjacent seats." Sophia checked their boarding passes. "You're right, Mr. Reynolds. Let me see what happened." Before she could investigate further, Veronica intervened. "Is there a problem here? My daughter and I were assigned seats together when I booked, but now we've been separated," Devin explained. Veronica scanned her tablet with a frown. "The system shows you were assigned these seats at booking." "That's not possible," Devin said firmly, remembering clearly selecting adjacent seats on the airline's website. "I specifically booked us together." By now, other passengers were watching the interaction, some with impatience as the boarding process slowed. Zoe clutched Captain Finn tighter, her eyes darting nervously between the adults. Devin recalled his father's words from decades ago, spoken after a store clerk had followed teenage Devin through every aisle. "They may question your presence, but never let them question your dignity." "Is there any way to resolve this?" Devin asked, his voice calm but firm. "My daughter is 8 years old. She needs to sit with me." The businessman in 3C, who had observed the entire interaction, unexpectedly spoke up. "I'm happy to switch seats if that helps." "That won't be necessary," Veronica replied quickly before turning back to her tablet. After several tense moments, she sighed. "It seems there was a system error. Sir, you and your daughter can take 3A and 3C, and Mr. Whitfield has offered to move to 3B. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield," Devin said, extending his hand to the businessman who had offered assistance. "Gerald Whitfield." The man introduced himself with a firm handshake. "No trouble at all." As they finally settled into their seats, Devin helped Zoe with her seatbelt, trying to turn the moment into something positive. "Look at that. You get the window seat after all." Zoe nodded, but her earlier excitement had dimmed. "Why didn't she want us to sit together, Dad?" Devin chose his words carefully. "Sometimes computer systems make mistakes. The important thing is that we're together now. Would you have stood your ground like Devin did when facing this situation?" Comment number 1. If you would have firmly insisted on sitting with your child no matter what. Or number 2, if you would have accepted the separate seats to avoid conflict. Don't forget to hit that like button if you appreciate Devin's calm approach to protecting his daughter while maintaining his dignity. Subscribe now for more stories about standing up against discrimination. Now, as Devin and Zoe settle into their seats, what additional challenges might they face before takeoff? Let's continue. The pre-flight routine unfolded around them as Devin tried to restore Zoe's excitement about their journey. First class was indeed luxurious compared to their usual travel experiences. Wide leather seats, actual legroom, and individual entertainment screens already displaying options for the flight ahead. "Look, Dad, they have that new animated movie I wanted to see," Zoe said, beginning to perk up as she explored the entertainment system. "That's great, sweetheart. Maybe we can watch it together once we're in the air," Devin suggested, grateful for the distraction. Veronica moved through the first-class cabin, offering pre-departure beverages to passengers with practiced efficiency. A warm smile for the elderly couple in row 1, a jovial comment about golf courses for the businessmen in row 2. When she reached their row, her demeanor noticeably cooled. "Anything to drink before takeoff?" she asked, her question directed more toward Gerald Whitfield than Devin and Zoe despite facing their seats. "Orange juice for my daughter, please, and coffee for me," Devin requested. Veronica nodded curtly. "I'll need to see ID for any alcoholic beverages," she stated automatically, despite Devin not having ordered any. "Just coffee," he repeated calmly, noting that she hadn't asked other passengers for identification regardless of their beverage choices. She returned moments later with their drinks, setting Gerald's ginger ale down carefully while practically dropping Devin's coffee on his tray table, causing it to slosh over the edge and onto his charcoal gray suit pants. "Oh, I apologize," she said, though her tone lacked sincerity. She handed him a cocktail napkin rather than offering the cloth napkins other first-class passengers had received. "It's fine," Devin replied, dabbing at the stain. The suit was one of his favorites, custom-tailored and expensive, a professional necessity for client meetings. Zoe watched with wide eyes as her father handled the situation with composure. "Dad, your suit," she whispered. "Nothing to worry about," he assured her, though they both knew the dark spot would be difficult to remove. As Veronica continued serving other passengers with notably warmer interactions, Devin discreetly began documenting the incidents on his phone's notes app, recording times, specific actions, and verbatim quotes. Years of navigating professional environments where he was the only person of color had taught him the importance of documentation. The contrast in service became increasingly obvious as the boarding process completed. Sophia Chen, the other flight attendant, offered warm towels to first-class passengers, lingering to chat with others but merely extending the basket toward Devin without comment. When Sophia stepped away to assist someone else, Zoe leaned toward her father. "Why doesn't she like us, Daddy?" she asked in a small voice that broke Devin's heart. Before he could formulate an age-appropriate response, Gerald Whitfield cleared his throat. "Couldn't help overhearing," he said quietly. "I've been watching this unfold. It's troubling." Devin gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, careful not to engage too obviously while Zoe was listening. "We're fine," he said simply. The interaction reminded Devin of his early days at Hamilton and Brooks Architecture, before he'd launched his own firm. Despite being hired for his innovative designs, he'd frequently been mistaken for a messenger or IT support. At client meetings, he'd learned to arrive early and sit prominently at the table. Otherwise, he'd inevitably be asked to fetch coffee or set up the presentation equipment. His mentor, Richard Hamilton, had eventually noticed and addressed it directly. "I've seen what you deal with, Devin. It's not right, but how you respond defines your career. Document everything, build allies, choose your battles, and when you fight, make sure you win." Devin had lived by that advice, carefully selecting which incidents to challenge and which to simply document for later. With Zoe beside him, vulnerable and watching, the stakes felt immeasurably higher. The captain announced their imminent departure, and Sophia began her safety demonstration while Veronica checked seat belts and tray tables. When she reached their row, she paused. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" she asked Devin. "You've verified it twice already," he replied evenly. "It's procedure," she insisted, her voice carrying enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. Devin retrieved his boarding pass once more, handing it over without comment. Veronica examined it thoroughly before returning it. "And verification that you're traveling with this child," she added. Devin felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. "My passport and her passport, which you've already checked twice, confirm we share the same last name. I am her father." Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his seat, exchanging glances with Devin. During the drink service after reaching cruising altitude, the pattern continued. Veronica served other passengers with ease and friendliness, but when she reached their row, her manner turned perfunctory. "What would you like to drink?" she asked Gerald first, despite Devin being in the aisle seat. After taking their orders, she returned with the drinks and a small bowl of warm nuts for each first-class passenger. When she served Devin, she placed his nuts and drink on the tray before loudly asking, "Is this credit card actually yours? I'll need to verify ID for our records." Several passengers turned to look, the implication hanging in the air. Devin wordlessly provided his ID yet again, the repeated requests forming an unmistakable pattern of suspicion and differential treatment. Sophia, observing from the galley, frowned slightly but continued with her duties. The pre-meal announcement was interrupted when Veronica approached their row yet again. "Sir, I need to verify your ID once more. There seems to be a discrepancy in our system." By now, even passengers who had been oblivious were beginning to notice the targeted scrutiny. Zoe shrank in her seat. Captain Finn clutched tightly against her chest as she sensed the growing tension. "What specific discrepancy?" Devin asked, his patience wearing thin but his voice remaining controlled. "This is the fourth time you've asked for my identification on this flight." "I'm just following protocol," Veronica replied stiffly. "Which protocol requires multiple ID checks of the same passenger after boarding?" Devin pressed, keeping his tone conversational despite the challenge in his words. Veronica's lips thinned. "Sir, if you continue to be difficult, I'll need to speak with the captain." "I'm simply asking which airline protocol you're following," Devin responded. "As a frequent flyer with your airline, I'm not familiar with this particular procedure." The confrontation hung in the air, other passengers now openly watching. Zoe's eyes filled with tears, the situation becoming increasingly distressing despite Devin's efforts to shield her. Gerald Whitfield shifted in his seat, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding beside him. His expression suggested a man wrestling with whether to intervene in a situation that had moved beyond mere poor service into something more troubling. For Devin, each incident brought back memories of similar moments. Being asked if he was delivering food when arriving at a client's home to discuss renovation plans. Campus security stopping him repeatedly while white students walked past unquestioned. Being followed by salespeople in high-end stores even while wearing his best suit. But this time was different. This time, Zoe was watching, learning, and internalizing. This time, the stakes were higher than his own dignity. This was about what his daughter would come to expect from the world, and whether she would learn to accept mistreatment as normal or stand against it. As the meal service began, Devin knew the situation was approaching a breaking point. Something would have to give, and he was determined it wouldn't be his daughter's sense of self-worth or her right to be treated with respect. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rivera speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay in our meal service due to some turbulence ahead. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened when the sign is illuminated. Our flight attendants will resume service shortly. The announcement provided a brief respite from the tension that had been building in the first-class cabin. Devin used the opportunity to lean over to Zoe, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since their last interaction with Veronica. "How about we start that movie you were excited about?" he suggested, trying to create a bubble of normalcy for her. Zoe nodded without her usual enthusiasm, her small fingers still wrapped tightly around Captain Finn. "Okay, Dad." Devin helped her navigate to the film, then excused himself. "I'm going to use the restroom quickly before the seatbelt sign comes on. Will you be okay for a minute?" "I'll be fine," she assured him with a maturity that sometimes caught him off guard. A reminder of all she had already weathered in her young life. In the privacy of the first-class lavatory, Devin finally allowed his carefully maintained facade to slip. He gripped the edges of the sink, taking several deep breaths as he studied his reflection in the mirror. The coffee stain on his pants had dried to an obvious dark patch, a visible reminder of the morning's indignities. He thought of Jessica, of what she would say in this moment. She had always been the more outspoken of the two, quick to call out injustice when she saw it. "Don't let them steal your joy," she would tell Zoe, whenever the little girl faced disappointment or unfairness. "Stand tall, speak truth, and remember who you are." In the months before cancer finally took her, Jessica had made Devin promise something beyond just giving Zoe opportunities. "Promise me you'll teach her to face the world as it is, not as we wish it would be," she had whispered during one of her more lucid moments. "But also teach her that she has the power to change it." Devin splashed water on his face, straightened his tie, and restored his composed expression. Whatever happened next, he would handle it with the dignity and strength Jessica would have expected. When he returned to his seat, the scene that greeted him stopped him cold in the aisle. Veronica was leaning over his empty seat, speaking directly to Zoe. "Sweetheart, who are you traveling with today?" she was asking in a sugary voice that contrasted sharply with her previous interactions. Zoe, eyes wide with confusion and distress, clutched Captain Finn so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "My dad," she answered, tears welling in her eyes. "He just went to the bathroom." "And where did you meet the man you're traveling with?" Veronica continued, her implication unmistakable. Tears spilled down Zoe's cheeks. "He's my dad," she repeated, her voice trembling. "What exactly is happening here?" Devin asked, his voice carrying enough authority to make Veronica straighten immediately. Around them, the cabin had gone quiet, other passengers watching the scene unfold with varying expressions of discomfort and concern. "I was just checking on your daughter's welfare," Veronica replied smoothly. "Standard procedure when a child is traveling." "Standard procedure is to question a child about her relationship to her parent while that parent is briefly using the restroom?" Devin challenged, sliding past Veronica to reach Zoe, who immediately threw her arms around him. "Dad, she kept asking me questions," Zoe whispered, burying her face against his chest. "She didn't believe you're my dad." Something shifted in Devin at that moment. A line crossed that transformed his careful patience into resolute determination. He had tolerated the repeated ID checks, the spillage on his suit, the thinly veiled suspicion. But making his daughter cry by insinuating she might not be safe with her own father, that was unforgivable. Gerald Whitfield, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "This is completely unprofessional," he stated firmly, addressing Veronica directly. "I've been watching this situation develop since boarding, and there's a clear pattern of differential treatment happening here." "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Veronica replied curtly. "Actually, it does," Gerald countered. as a fellow passenger who expects this airline to treat all its customers with equal respect. Other passengers began to murmur, the mood in the cabin shifting as the situation became impossible to ignore. Devin gently wiped the tears from Zoe's cheeks. "It's okay, baby. I'm right here." He remembered his promise to Jessica on her deathbed, how he had held her frail hand and sworn to protect their daughter from the world's cruelty, while still teaching her to face it with strength. In that moment, the memory crystallized his resolve. With one arm still around Zoe, Devin looked directly at Veronica. "This stops now," he said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable firmness. "Since boarding this flight, you have repeatedly singled me out for additional scrutiny, questioned my presence in first class, separated me from my daughter despite our booking, spilled coffee on me without a proper apology, and now interrogated my child in my brief absence." Veronica's expression hardened. "Sir, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to request security meet the aircraft." "Documenting discriminatory treatment is not being disruptive," Devin replied calmly. "I have recorded every interaction since boarding, including timestamps and witnesses." Sophia stepped forward from where she had been observing in the galley. "Veronica, perhaps we should—" "I have this handled." Veronica cut her off sharply before turning back to Devin. "Sir, please return to your seat and lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers." Indeed, the entire first-class cabin was now watching the confrontation. The in-flight entertainment forgotten as a real-life drama unfolded before them. Devin made a decision. He reached for his phone. "What are you doing?" Veronica demanded. "Making a call," Devin replied simply. "Phones must be in airplane mode during flight," she reminded him with a triumphant edge. "Actually," Gerald interjected, "the captain hasn't asked us to turn off electronics yet since we're still at the gate due to the delay." Zoe looked up at her father, her eyes still shimmering with tears but now containing a question. Devin gave her a reassuring smile. "Remember Uncle Theo?" he asked her quietly. Zoe nodded. "Your friend who's a lawyer?" "That's right. I think it's time we gave him a call." Devin dialed Theodore's number with a steady hand, holding the phone where Veronica could clearly see he was making an actual call, not bluffing. After 2 rings, Theodore's deep voice answered. "Devin, aren't you supposed to be in the air to Seattle by now?" "That was the plan," Devin replied, his voice clear and controlled, intentionally loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "But we've encountered a situation I could use your professional advice on." Theodore's tone immediately shifted, recognizing the careful phrasing. "I'm listening. What's happening?" Devin proceeded to outline the events since their arrival at the airport. The initial questioning at check-in, the random secondary screening, the repeated ID verification, the seating issue, the coffee incident, and finally, the interrogation of Zoe in his absence. As he spoke, Veronica's expression gradually changed from defensive indignation to growing concern. Several passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in confirmation of Devin's account of events they had witnessed. "I see," Theodore said when Devin finished. "And this has been a consistent pattern throughout your interaction with this particular flight attendant?" "Yes," Devin confirmed. "Other passengers have been treated with courtesy and standard service protocols." "Put me on speaker," Theodore requested. Devin complied, holding the phone where both Veronica and surrounding passengers could hear. "This is Theodore Washington, attorney at law," he introduced himself, his voice carrying the weight of his considerable professional reputation. "To whom am I speaking?" Veronica hesitated before answering. "Veronica Winters, lead flight attendant." "Ms. Winters, are you aware that what you've been engaging in constitutes a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior that violates both airline policy and federal law regarding equal treatment of passengers?" Veronica stiffened. "I was simply following security protocols." "Interesting," Theodore replied. "I would very much like to review those specific protocols that require repeated ID verification of only certain passengers after boarding, separation of a parent and minor child despite confirmed booking, and questioning a child about their relationship to their parent without that parent's consent or presence. Sophia, who had been hovering nearby, took a step forward. "I can confirm that these are not standard protocols," she said quietly, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal her discomfort with the situation. Devin gave her a grateful nod as she continued. "I'd be willing to provide a statement regarding the inconsistent application of service standards I've observed," Sophia added, sliding Devin a business card with her employee information discreetly. Gerald Whitfield leaned forward. "As would I," he stated firmly. "I've witnessed this entire interaction." Theodore's voice remained measured over the speakerphone. "Devin, as your friend of 20 years and as your attorney, I advise you of your rights in this situation. As a paying customer who has been subjected to discriminatory treatment, you have the right to request the immediate intervention of a customer service manager, file a formal complaint, and pursue legal remedies for the emotional distress caused to both you and your minor daughter." He paused before adding, "I should also mention that I'm currently representing the National Civil Rights Coalition in their ongoing case regarding discriminatory treatment in the transportation industry. This incident appears to follow the exact pattern we're challenging in federal court." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted perceptibly as passengers realized they were witnessing something beyond a routine customer service issue. "Additionally," Theodore continued, "I believe you're traveling to Seattle for the Riverfront Development Corporation project? The same corporation whose CEO sits on the airline's board of directors?" Devin confirmed this was correct, watching Veronica's face pale slightly at the connection. "And isn't your firm designing the new National Civil Rights Museum expansion that I'm chairing?" Theodore asked, the strategic revelation hanging in the air. "That's right," Devin replied, the full context of his professional stature becoming apparent to everyone listening. What few knew was that Devin and Theodore's friendship stretched back to their first day at Cornell, when they'd been randomly assigned as roommates. Theodore, the son of prominent civil rights activists from Chicago, and Devin, a scholarship student from Atlanta, had formed an immediate bond that transcended their different backgrounds. During their sophomore year, a notoriously difficult professor had consistently undergraded Devin's architectural designs while praising identical concepts from white students. Theodore had helped Devin document the pattern, present the evidence to the department chair, and ultimately have his grades reviewed and corrected. It was Theodore's first real case, years before he earned his law degree. "I'll conference in Janelle from our legal team," Theodore was saying. "And I'll also reach out to Charlotte Jensen. We were on a panel together last month discussing corporate diversity initiatives." "Who is Charlotte Jensen?" Veronica asked, her voice noticeably less confident. "Your airline's CEO," Theodore replied simply. A soft gasp from Sophia confirmed the significance of this connection. Theodore continued, "Devin, what would you like to happen here? As your counsel, I need to understand your desired outcome." Devin looked at Zoe, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. Her tears now dried as she observed her father handling the situation with calm authority. He thought carefully before answering. "I want acknowledgement of the discriminatory treatment we've received, appropriate consequences for that treatment, and assurance that other families won't face similar experiences," he stated clearly. "And I want my daughter to see that standing up for yourself can affect real change." Have you ever had to make a powerful phone call to advocate for yourself or a loved one in a difficult situation? Comment number 1 if you've had to stand firm against unfair treatment, or number 2 if you've been fortunate enough to avoid such confrontations. Hit that like button if you admired Devin's strategic approach to resolving this situation. Subscribe now to see how this story unfolds and whether justice will be served. The tide seems to be turning, but will Devin and Zoe finally receive the respect they deserve? Let's find out. "I'm setting up a conference call with the airline's general counsel," Theodore announced through the speakerphone. "They should be available within minutes. In the meantime, Devin, please continue documenting everything." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had transformed completely. The initial discomfort of witnessing conflict had given way to something different, a collective recognition that they were observing an important moment, a stand against an injustice that many had seen but few had challenged. Devin nodded, though Theodore couldn't see him. "Thank you, Theo." He turned to Veronica, whose composure had visibly faltered. "My daughter and I will deplane unless the situation is addressed immediately. I won't subject her to further discrimination." The statement was firm but not aggressive, a boundary clearly drawn. An elderly woman in the first row turned in her seat. "Young man, I've been watching this whole thing unfold. It's shameful how you've been treated. I'm happy to provide my contact information as another witness." Several other passengers murmured in agreement, the tide of public opinion having shifted decisively. Veronica looked increasingly uncomfortable as she realized her actions had an audience that was not on her side. "Sir, there's no need to deplane. If you'll just return to your seat." "Excuse me," interrupted Gerald Whitfield, "but I think there very much is a need for significant remedy here." He extended his business card to Devin. "Gerald Whitfield, senior correspondent for Business Weekly. While I'm not traveling in a professional capacity today, I can't help but see a story here about corporate culture and accountability." Devin accepted the card with a nod of thanks, understanding now why Gerald had seemed to be observing the situation so analytically. As a journalist for a major business publication, he was trained to notice patterns and document significant interactions. Sophia stepped forward again, her professional demeanor now tinged with determination. "I've contacted the lead purser and the captain about the situation," she informed them quietly. "Captain Rivera would like to speak with you, Ms. Winters." A new announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rivera speaking. We apologize for the continued delay. We're working to resolve a situation and should be underway shortly." "Thank you for your patience." The subtext was clear to everyone in the cabin. The situation being addressed was happening right before their eyes. Veronica's radio crackled, and she stepped away to answer it, her back rigid with tension. In the momentary lull, Devin turned his attention to Zoe. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Zoe nodded, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "You're not letting them be mean to us," she observed, "like Mom would want." The simple statement caught Devin off guard, a lump forming in his throat. Even at 8, Zoe understood exactly what was happening and what was at stake. "That's right," he confirmed softly. "We deserve to be treated with respect, just like everyone else." Around them, other passengers had begun sharing their own observations. "I noticed the difference in how she spoke to you compared to me," admitted a man across the aisle. "I didn't say anything, and I should have." "She checked your ID 4 times, but never once asked for mine," added another passenger. "The way she questioned your daughter was completely inappropriate," an older woman stated firmly. "I worked in child welfare for 30 years, and there was no legitimate safeguarding concern there. Just harassment." As the collective awareness spread through the cabin, Theodore's voice came through the phone again. "Devin, I have the airline's general counsel, James Peterson, on the line. He'd like to speak with you." A new voice joined the call. "Mr. Reynolds, this is James Peterson, general counsel for Atlantic Airways. I understand there's been a significant issue with your treatment on board today." "That's correct," Devin confirmed, proceeding to summarize the events again concisely. "This is deeply concerning and completely contrary to our company policies," Peterson responded. "We take allegations of discriminatory treatment extremely seriously. I'm authorizing our customer service team to meet the aircraft immediately. May I ask what would resolve this situation to your satisfaction?" Before Devin could answer, the aircraft door reopened, and a woman in a sharp suit entered, followed by 2 customer service representatives. Her badge identified her as Megan Clark, regional manager. "Mr. Reynolds?" she asked, approaching their seats. "I understand there's been a situation that requires immediate attention." Sophia quickly briefed the manager while Veronica remained near the galley, speaking in hushed tones with the captain who had emerged from the cockpit. "Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of Atlantic Airways, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for your experience today," Megan began, her tone professionally contrite. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." "Excuse me," Devin interrupted politely but firmly. "But characterizing repeated discriminatory behavior as a misunderstanding diminishes the seriousness of what occurred here. Several passengers nodded in agreement. It was clearly targeted, Gerald added. I and many others witnessed the pattern of differential treatment. Megan's expression shifted as she realized the situation was more serious and more public than she had perhaps been briefed. You're absolutely right, she acknowledged. I apologize for my choice of words. We do not condone any form of discrimination, and there will be a full investigation. Theodore's voice came through the speakerphone again. We would expect nothing less than a complete investigation, appropriate disciplinary action, and systemic changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. The regional manager looked startled at the realization that an attorney was already involved and listening to the conversation. Of course, she agreed quickly. Our CEO, Charlotte Jensen, has been notified of the situation and... She was interrupted by Sophia, who approached with a message. Ms. Clark, Ms. Jensen is on the line for Mr. Reynolds. A ripple of surprise went through the cabin. It was virtually unheard of for an airline CEO to personally intervene in a customer service issue in real time. Megan's eyes widened slightly before she composed herself. Mr. Reynolds, would you prefer to take that call privately? No need, Devin replied calmly. This situation unfolded publicly. Its resolution can be public as well. He accepted the airline phone Sophia offered, aware that the entire cabin was now listening intently. Mr. Reynolds, Charlotte Jensen here. I've been briefed on the situation, and I want to personally apologize for the treatment you and your daughter experienced today. Thank you, Ms. Jensen, Devin responded. This is not who we are as a company, she continued. I understand you're traveling to Seattle for a meeting with Riverfront Development Corporation. Tom Sherman is a personal friend, and he speaks very highly of your work. I appreciate that, Devin acknowledged, recognizing that the CEO was establishing their mutual connections, a tacit acknowledgement that he was someone who should have been treated with respect regardless of the color of his skin. I'd like to make this right, Jensen continued. We have a company jet currently at the airport. I'd like to offer you and your daughter private transportation to Seattle, along with complimentary accommodations for your stay. The offer hung in the air, generous certainly, but also potentially problematic. While I appreciate the offer, Ms. Jensen, Devin replied thoughtfully, accepting special treatment now would undermine the principle at stake here. This isn't about me receiving preferential service after the fact. It's about ensuring all passengers are treated with equal respect from the start. A murmur of approval went through the cabin. I understand, Jensen responded. What would you suggest instead? Devin considered for a moment, aware that his response could potentially impact more than just his own situation. 3 things, he decided. First, a formal acknowledgement from the airline that what occurred today was discriminatory and unacceptable. Second, a comprehensive review and enhancement of your diversity training programs, which my firm would be willing to consult on. And third, a substantial donation to the National Civil Rights Museum that my friend Theodore Washington and I are currently working with. There was a brief pause before Jensen replied. Those are reasonable requests, Mr. Reynolds. Consider them done. Additionally, I would like to offer every passenger on this flight vouchers for future travel as an apology for the delay. The resolution was taking shape, but one matter remained unaddressed. Devin looked toward the galley where Veronica stood, her expression a mixture of defiance and apprehension. And Ms. Winters? He asked quietly. Will be suspended pending a full investigation, Jensen confirmed. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Captain Rivera approached their seats. Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Jensen has asked me to personally ensure you and your daughter have a comfortable flight to Seattle. We're ready for departure if you're comfortable proceeding. Devin looked at Zoe, silently asking for her input. After all, this was about her comfort and dignity as much as his own. Zoe nodded. I'm okay if you are, Dad. With that simple exchange, the final decision was made. We'll continue to Seattle as planned, Devin confirmed. As Veronica was escorted off the aircraft, visibly shaken by the turn of events, Sophia took over as the lead flight attendant. The remaining crew members went out of their way to ensure every passenger's comfort. particularly Devin and Zoe's. When they finally pushed back from the gate, nearly an hour behind schedule, a spontaneous round of applause broke out in the first-class cabin, not for the crew, but for the father and daughter whose dignity had prevailed against discrimination. Zoe leaned close to her father as the aircraft began to taxi. "Dad," she whispered, "I think you just changed how they see us." The simple observation carried profound weight, reminding Devin of exactly why he had chosen to stand his ground rather than quietly endure yet another instance of discrimination. Some battles weren't just for himself. They were for Zoe, for Jessica's memory, and for countless others who faced similar treatment every day. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Devin felt something shift within him, a sense that perhaps one small stand, witnessed by a cabin full of people who could no longer claim ignorance, might ripple outward in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The aircraft reached cruising altitude, the usual announcements and procedures moving forward with a new crew dynamic. Sophia had stepped into the lead role with natural authority, treating every passenger with identical courtesy and warmth. The tension that had permeated the cabin earlier had dissipated, replaced by an unusual sense of community among the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation and its resolution. As the meal service began, Megan Clark, the regional manager who had remained on board, approached Devin's seat. "Mr. Reynolds, I wanted to personally address what happened," she began, her tone more genuine than her initial corporate response. "The airline's official statement is being drafted now, but I want you to know that I'm deeply sorry for what you and your daughter experienced." Devin nodded, appreciating the sincerity that now replaced the earlier attempt to minimize the situation. "Thank you. Ms. Jensen asked me to provide you with this," she continued, handing him a business card with a handwritten note on the back. "She'd like to discuss your suggestions for our training programs in more detail once you've returned from Seattle." The interaction was observed by the surrounding passengers, the power dynamic having shifted dramatically in the past hour. Where Devin had initially been treated with suspicion and disdain, he was now being courted by airline management. "I have something for Zoe as well," Megan added, producing a model airplane and a stuffed animal wearing a pilot's cap. "It's not much, but we want her to know that she is absolutely welcome on our flights." Zoe accepted the gifts with a shy smile. "Thank you." As Megan returned to her seat near the front of the cabin, Gerald leaned over. "Quite a turn of events," he observed. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been taking notes. This is an important story about corporate accountability and the power of standing up for oneself." "I don't mind," Devin replied, "though I'd appreciate you focusing on the systemic issues rather than making it just about us." Gerald nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely. This is about patterns of behavior that affect countless travelers. Your experience today is simply a well-documented example." The meal service continued, the first-class experience now matching the premium price Devin had paid. Sophia ensured their meals were served first as a subtle form of acknowledgement, and other crew members stopped by to introduce themselves with genuine warmth. Halfway through the flight, Theodore called back. Devin excused himself to take the call in the galley area where he could speak privately. "How's it going?" Theodore asked. "Any further issues?" "Complete turnaround," Devin confirmed. "It's almost surreal." "Not surreal at all," Theodore responded. "It's what should have happened from the beginning. By the way, Charlotte Jensen called me directly after speaking with you. She's taking this very seriously, as she should." "I got that impression," Devin agreed. "There's something else you should know," Theodore continued. "I didn't want to mention it during the initial call since we were focusing on resolving the immediate situation. But your firm is actually on the short list to design Atlantic Airways' new terminal expansion." Devin hadn't been aware of this. Such preliminary discussions typically happened at the board level before architects were approached. "That's why Jensen responded so quickly," Theodore explained. "Beyond the obvious PR implications, they literally can't afford to alienate one of the country's top black architects when they're trying to showcase diversity in their expansion project." The revelation added another layer to the swift resolution. While Devin wanted to believe the response was purely ethical, he was experienced enough to understand that corporate decisions often balanced multiple motivations. One more thing, Theodore added. Gerald Whitfield isn't just any journalist. He's writing a feature series on corporate America's diversity challenges. Having him witness this firsthand, you couldn't have planned better media coverage if you tried. When Devin returned to his seat, he found Zoe chatting animatedly with a flight attendant about marine biology, her earlier distress now replaced by excitement about their Seattle adventure. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze him. Given safety and validation, they could bounce back from difficult experiences with remarkable speed. As the flight progressed, passengers continued to approach their seats, some offering business cards as potential witnesses, others simply expressing support. An older black couple stopped specifically to tell Devin, "What you did today matters. Our generation endured in silence too often. Seeing you stand up like that gives us hope." The comment reminded Devin of his parents, of their different approach to discrimination, the quiet dignity, the focus on excellence rather than confrontation, the private processing of public humiliations. Their way had gotten him through Cornell and into a successful career. But Zoe was growing up in a different world, one where silence no longer felt like the right response. About an hour before landing, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rivera. I wanted to personally thank you for your patience today. I've been informed that Atlantic Airways will be providing each of you with a travel voucher as appreciation. More importantly, I want to acknowledge that our airline fell short of our values today. As captain of this aircraft, I take full responsibility for everything that happens on board, and I extend my personal apology to the Reynolds family." The unprecedented announcement was met with another round of applause from the passengers. Shortly after, Captain Rivera emerged from the cockpit and made his way directly to Devin's seat, extending his hand. "Mr. Reynolds, I'd like to apologize in person. There is absolutely no place for what happened today on my aircraft or in our company." "I appreciate that, Captain," Devin replied, shaking the offered hand. "Your daughter mentioned to our flight attendant that she's interested in marine biology," the captain continued with a warm smile toward Zoe. "The first officer and I were wondering if you both might like to visit the cockpit before we land. We have a great view of the Pacific as we approach Seattle." Zoe's eyes widened with excitement. "Can we, Dad?" "Of course," Devin agreed, recognizing the offer as both a genuine kindness and a symbolic gesture. Access to a space typically off-limits, a complete reversal of the earlier exclusionary treatment. As they followed Captain Rivera toward the cockpit, Devin's phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line read, "Atlantic Airways official statement for your approval before release." The email contained a draft statement acknowledging the discriminatory treatment, outlining immediate actions including Veronica's suspension, mandatory company-wide training enhancements, and a six-figure donation to the National Civil Rights Museum. Most significantly, it explicitly named anti-black racism rather than hiding behind euphemisms like regrettable incident or misunderstanding. Devin forwarded the email to Theodore with a brief note. Progress. In the cockpit, First Officer Chen showed Zoe how various instruments worked while Captain Rivera pointed out geographical features as they began their descent into Seattle. The experience was everything an 8-year-old could hope for, Zoe's questions coming rapid fire as she absorbed every detail of the complex equipment surrounding them. "Your daughter is incredibly bright," Captain Rivera commented as they prepared to return to their seats for landing. "The way she understood the navigation system so quickly, impressive." "She gets her intelligence from her mother," Devin replied with the bittersweet pride that always accompanied memories of Jessica. "Well, she's lucky to have such a strong advocate in her father," the captain responded. "What happened today, the way you handled it, that's something she'll remember forever." As they made their way back to first class, Devin realized the captain was right. Today had become one of those defining moments that would shape Zoe's understanding of justice, dignity, and the power of standing firm in the face of wrongdoing. When they reached their seats, Sophia informed them that Ms. Jensen was on the line again, asking to speak with Devin before landing. He took the call, listening as the CEO outlined additional steps the airline would be taking, changes to training protocols, a review of customer complaint patterns to identify potential systemic issues, and a request for Devin's firm to consult on creating more inclusive spaces within their airports. "We want to turn this regrettable incident into an opportunity for meaningful change," Jensen concluded. "Sometimes it takes a clear example of where we failed to illuminate the path forward." As they prepared for landing, Gerald passed Devin a business card with a note. "Your story deserves to be told properly. Let's talk when you're ready." Seattle's distinctive skyline came into view, the Space Needle punctuating the horizon as they descended through cloud cover. Zoe pressed her face against the window, her earlier trauma now overshadowed by excitement for the adventure ahead. "Dad," she whispered as the wheels touched down at SeaTac Airport. "I think today was important, wasn't it?" Devin squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Today was very important." The aircraft taxied to the gate, but before the seatbelt sign was turned off, Sophia made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Captain Rivera and the entire crew, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. As you deplane, you'll find our customer service team waiting with information about the travel vouchers that have been added to your accounts. We also want to express our appreciation for your patience and understanding during today's events." As first-class passengers began to gather their belongings, many stopped to shake Devin's hand or offer words of support. The same community that had witnessed his humiliation had now witnessed his vindication, and in that process, perhaps experienced their own education about the reality of everyday discrimination that often occurred just beyond their notice. Devin helped Zoe collect Captain Finn and her backpack, reflecting on how differently this day had unfolded from what he had anticipated. What began as a simple business trip had transformed into something with potential ripple effects far beyond their personal experience. As they prepared to deplane, Zoe looked up at her father with that perceptive expression that sometimes made her seem older than her years. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm proud of you." The simple statement, delivered with such earnest conviction, meant more to Devin than all the corporate apologies and professional vindication combined. 1 week later, Devin and Zoe walked through Pike Place Market, sampling local specialties and watching the famous fish-throwing ritual that delighted tourists. Their Seattle trip had been extended by 2 days, the Riverfront Development Corporation contract successfully secured, with additional time built in for exploration and adventure. "Dad, look!" Zoe pointed excitedly toward a newspaper stand where Business Weekly's latest issue was prominently displayed. The cover story headline read, "Flying While Black, One Family's Stand Against Discrimination Sparks Industry Reckoning." Gerald Whitfield had kept his word, crafting a thoughtful exploration of how seemingly isolated incidents reflected broader patterns of discrimination in the airline industry and beyond. Rather than sensationalizing their specific experience, he had used it as an entry point to examine corporate responsibility, bystander intervention, and the economic cost of discrimination. Devin purchased a copy, tucking it into his bag as they continued their market exploration. His phone had been buzzing consistently since the article's publication. Interview requests, speaking invitations, and most significantly, new client inquiries from companies suddenly eager to demonstrate their commitment to diversity through their architectural choices. Theodore had called that morning with an update. "The airline's donation to the museum has been confirmed, twice the amount we initially discussed, and Veronica Winters issued a public apology letter yesterday." "Forced or genuine?" Devin had asked, skeptical about the motivation. "Hard to say," Theodore admitted. "But she's also enrolled in a community service program working with inner-city youth, required as part of her continued employment, but still might be educational for her." The most surprising development had come through Sophia Chen, who had reached out to share that Atlantic Airways was implementing a comprehensive anti-bias training program designed with input from Devin's architectural firm, which specialized in creating inclusive spaces. The company had asked Devin's team to review physical aspects of their terminals and lounges to identify and address subtle design elements that might contribute to exclusionary atmospheres. "Dad, can we go see the harbor seals now?" Zoe asked, pulling him back to the present moment. "Absolutely," he agreed. checking his watch. The aquarium opens in 20 minutes. As they walked toward the waterfront, Devin reflected on how the incident had affected Zoe. Rather than becoming fearful or withdrawn, she had embraced a new confidence, proudly sharing the story with her classmates upon their return, and even creating a school project about standing up against unfair treatment. Her teacher had called Devin, impressed by Zoe's articulate presentation on being an upstander, not a bystander. The project had won a district-wide citizenship award, with Zoe explaining to judges how her father had demonstrated that you can stand up for yourself without being mean to others. The aquarium proved to be everything Zoe had hoped for, her journal quickly filling with observations about Pacific marine life. As she pressed her face against the glass of the harbor seal exhibit, a staff marine biologist noticed her detailed notes. "You've got quite the scientist there," she commented to Devin. "Those are excellent observations for someone her age." "She gets it from her mother," Devin replied with the familiar bittersweet pride. "She was a biology professor." The marine biologist ended up giving them a behind-the-scenes tour, Zoe's enthusiasm and knowledge earning her special attention. By the end of their visit, Zoe had been invited to join a junior marine biologist program that offered online participation for out-of-state students. Their final evening in Seattle found them dining at the revolving restaurant atop the Space Needle, a splurge that felt appropriate for their last night. As the city lights twinkled below them, Zoe grew contemplative. "Dad," she began, stirring her virgin strawberry daiquiri with its paper umbrella. "Do you think Mom knows what happened on the plane?" The question caught Devin off guard. They spoke of Jessica often, keeping her memory alive through stories and photographs. But Zoe rarely speculated about her mother's continued awareness or presence. "What do you think?" he asked carefully. Zoe considered this seriously. "I think she does. And I think she's proud of how you stood up without becoming what you were fighting against. That's what you always tell me she would want." Devin swallowed hard, struck by his daughter's insight. "I think you're right, sweetheart." 2 days later, they boarded their return flight to Atlanta. The difference in experience was stark from the moment they entered the airport. The check-in agent greeted them warmly. Their passage through security was smooth and respectful, and when they reached the gate, the attendant welcomed them by name. "Mr. Reynolds and Ms. Reynolds, we're delighted to have you with us today. We'll begin boarding in about 15 minutes. When they did board, the lead flight attendant personally escorted them to their seats, ensuring they were comfortably settled before attending to other passengers. "Is this because of what happened before?" Zoe whispered, perceptive as always. "Partially," Devin acknowledged honestly. "But this is also how everyone should be treated." The flight home was pleasantly uneventful, the service attentive without being obsequious, the crew professional and warm toward all passengers. As they began their descent into Atlanta, Devin received an email from Charlotte Jensen with the subject line, "Impact Update." The email detailed changes already implemented across Atlantic Airways, revised training protocols, a new reporting system for discriminatory incidents, and the formation of a passenger advocacy council that would include diverse representation. Most significantly, Jensen reported that passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment had decreased by 12% in just the short time since these changes began, suggesting that their impact extended well beyond Devin and Zoe's personal experience. As they collected their luggage at Hartsfield-Jackson, Devin spotted a familiar face waiting in the arrivals area, Theodore, holding a sign that read, "Reynolds Family," in his characteristically precise handwriting. "Uncle Theo," Zoe called, running toward him for a hug. "There's my favorite marine biologist," Theodore greeted her, scooping her up despite her growing size. "I've missed you, kiddo." "What are you doing here?" Devin asked, surprised by his friend's presence. "I thought you were in Washington until Friday." "Case settled early," Theodore explained, "and I wanted to welcome the celebrities home in person." Over dinner at Devin's favorite restaurant, where they were now treated like VIPs, Theodore shared additional news. The incident had sparked interest from legislators who were now pushing for industry-wide passenger rights legislation with specific protections against discriminatory treatment. "Your one phone call didn't just change your flight," Theodore observed. it might end up changing air travel for countless others. Later that evening, after Zoe had gone to bed, exhausted from their journey, Devin sat on his back deck with a glass of Jessica's favorite wine. He could almost feel her presence beside him, could almost hear her saying, "You did good, Dev." One phone call had indeed changed everything, not just the outcome of an unpleasant incident, but perhaps the trajectory of how discrimination was addressed in spaces where it had long been quietly endured. For Zoe, the lesson had been powerful. Dignity was non-negotiable, justice was worth pursuing, and one voice raised at the right moment could catalyze meaningful change. As Devin sipped his wine under the Atlanta stars, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Not just the Seattle trip, but the longer journey of his life, the legacy of his parents' quiet perseverance, Jessica's fierce advocacy, and now his own determination to create a world where Zoe would be judged by the content of her character rather than the color of her skin. The story of what happened on that flight had already spread far beyond the confines of the aircraft cabin, with messages arriving daily from people sharing similar experiences or from allies committed to doing better. One stand, witnessed by a plane full of people who could no longer claim ignorance, had rippled outward in exactly the ways he had hoped. In the end, one phone call had changed everything. This powerful story teaches us that standing up against discrimination requires both courage and strategy. Devin's approach demonstrates that we can fight injustice with dignity, without compromising our values. By documenting incidents, building alliances, and knowing when to escalate, we can effectively challenge systemic discrimination. The most important lesson is that silence perpetuates injustice. When Devin chose to speak up rather than endure mistreatment, he not only reclaimed his dignity but created ripple effects that benefited countless others. His actions forced accountability from those in power and educated bystanders who might have remained oblivious. For parents, this story reminds us that our children are always watching how we respond to injustice. By modeling principled resistance rather than passive acceptance, we teach them to value their worth and stand firm against unfair treatment. Finally, we learn that change requires both individual courage and institutional accountability. One person's stand can spark a movement, but lasting transformation demands systemic changes in policies, training, and corporate culture. What discrimination have you witnessed or experienced while traveling? Comment below with your story or how you would have handled Devin's situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Have you ever had to make that power call to someone who could help you stand up against unfair treatment? Share your experience in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about everyday heroes standing against injustice. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our new uploads. Thank you for joining us for this journey. Remember, sometimes one phone call, one moment of courage, can change not just your own circumstances, but create a better world for everyone. Stay strong and keep standing up for what's right.